I'm Showmo Data, and this is Built to Trust. Today I want to talk about cadence, how we plan, push, and reflect in a way that keeps teams fast without running them flat. The shape I've come to trust is a steady 6-week milestone rhythm. 6 weeks is long enough to do something real and short enough to see the edges of our mistakes while they're still small. It creates a heartbeat. 4 weeks of focused push, 1 week to integrate and harden, and 1 week to reflect, reset the baseline, and plan the next cycle. Push, reflect, repeat. If episode 2 was clarity beats intensity, episode 3 is cadence sustains clarity. When you run on adrenaline alone, everything feels urgent and nothing feels finished. When you run on cadence, you still move fast, but you also build in the pauses that make speed sustainable. I've seen both in the wild. The first looks heroic for a while. Late night commits, Slack threads at 1 a.m., expressive dashboards that never quite turn green. The second looks almost boring until you realize how much is shipping and how calm the room is. People know the hill they're on, the finish line they're driving toward, and they trust there's a recovery lap coming. That trust changes how they work. Let me walk you through how I like to use a 6-week milestone. Think of it as 3 arcs. Arc 1 is weeks 1 through 4, focused build toward a crisp goal. Arc 2 is week 5, integration, hardening, remedial work you fully expect because the real world disagrees with plans. Arc 3 is week 6, demo, retrospective, risk, and baseline update, and the planning session that sets the next 6 weeks in motion. The artifacts are simple: a 1-page goal, brief you can hang on a wall, a living risk list with owners and triggers, a demo with objective acceptance criteria, and a baseline that we update at the end. Scope, schedule, spec, and spend as a single snapshot of what we now know to be true. There's a reason week 5 is sacred. Most teams pretend week 5 doesn't exist. They push features up to the line and then run straight into a demo. The result is a demo that's really a rehearsal and a retrospective that becomes a postmortem on why the demo wasn't real. When we bake in a hardening week, we're telling the truth about integration. It always reveals interface gaps, environmental mismatches, and tests that lied. We're admitting that soak tests matter, that telemetry needs to be tuned, that the first end-to-end pass is where the gremlins hide. Week 5 is where we fix the seams and get the thing into a shippable state. Not perfect, but shippable by the standard we set at kickoff. Then comes week 6. This is where push turns into reflect. I run 3 ceremonies and I keep them tight: the demo, the retrospective, and the baseline review and plan. The demo is simple. Show the goal as written, not a slide describing the goal. Done when X, measured by Y, observed in Z. Either we did it or we did not. If we didn't, we tell the truth about why and what we're going to change. Then we do the retrospective. I'll come back to how to run a great retro in a minute. Finally, we update the baseline and plan the next 6 weeks. What moved, what's now true, which risks went down, which went up, which we discovered, which we're accepting. Let's go deeper on the retrospective, because this is where teams earn their next cycle of speed. The simplest version that still works is built around 3 questions. What went well? What should we do better? And what should we keep doing? Sometimes I'll add a 4th. What should we stop? The power of a retro isn't the wall of sticky notes. It's the quality of the conversation and the fact that it leads to a small number of real changes with owners and dates. 5 best practices have saved me a lot of pain here. First, make it psychologically safe by design. Start with appreciations. I want to call out X for taking on the ugly integration work. I appreciate Y for saying I don't know early. It sets the tone that we're here to learn, not to prosecute. Second, anchor in data. Pull up the metrics we agreed to at kickoff: latency, defect counts, test pass rates, time to triage, whatever matters for the goal. Memory is a poor historian. Data is a better one. Third, build a shared timeline. What happened when? What changed? Where did we pivot? Draw it. A visual timeline keeps us from arguing opinion versus opinion. Fourth, harvest a small set of specific improvements and assign them like any other work. Not, we should communicate more, but we will publish a one-page weekly status by Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Dana owns starts next week. Not more testing, but add a deterministic soak test that runs for 12 hours nightly. Min owns, first run by Thursday. Fifth, close the loop next retro. Start every retro by reading the last retro's actions out loud and marking them done or not. If you don't do this, retros become theater. People will sense it and they'll stop telling the truth. A word on facilitation. A good retro is a conversation, not a complaint session. Keep it timed and focused. I like a 60-minute cap for most teams. 10 minutes for appreciations and data. 10 to paint the timeline. 20 to discuss highlights and lowlights. 15 to decide on 3 concrete improvements. 5 to assign owners and dates. You can stretch to 90 if the cycle was especially heavy, but if you can't do a useful retro in an hour, the problem likely isn't time. It's that the goal and measures weren't clear enough at kickoff. Fix that upstream. Now let's talk about MVP, because cadence without a disciplined definition of viable turns into 6-week loops of shiny prototypes that don't hold under real conditions. In a consumer app world, MVP is often pitched as the smallest thing people will use in safety or reliability critical spaces, and frankly in any space where you want to be proud of the work. Viable must include safe, reliable, and compliant with the minimum requirements that define success. Viable does not mean hacks that pass a happy path demo. Viable means this can operate in its intended environment with acceptable risk, predictable behavior, and a clear path to scale. When I say MVP, I mean a thin, end-to-end slice that includes the discipline we can't pretend will arrive later. Basic telemetry, so we can see it, rollback so we can unship it, guardrails so it can't create new safety hazards, and documented acceptance criteria tied to requirements. It will not have every feature, it will not be optimized, it will be the smallest integrated thing that works reliably and does not break the system around it. If you're building an internal service, that might mean one narrow use case with an SLO you can meet and an on-call rotation that exists. If you're building a vehicle subsystem, that might mean one flight mode with evidence through tests that it does what it says and it fails safely. Defining viable forces the hard conversations early. What hazards exist and how are we mitigating them? What's the minimum telemetry to detect a fault? What are the rollback procedures and who owns them? What will we not do in V1 to hit the date without compromising safety or reliability? I like to write viable means as a paragraph in the kickoff brief. It's a contract. If someone tries to bend it mid-cycle, we escalate that choice explicitly. We don't let just this once erode the meaning of done. This brings us to burnout. Cadence is a buffer against burnout, but it isn't a cure-all. Burnout sneaks in through a set of signals that are easy to misread as apathy or incompetence. Here's what I look for: rising cynicism in otherwise engaged people, quality dips not explained by complexity, slower recovery from setbacks, withdrawal from discussions where that person normally leans in, resignation humor, more I'll just do it myself, and less let's figure this out. The calendar creeping into nights and weekends as the default rather than the exception. One bad week is not burnout. A pattern is. When I spot those signals, I try to intervene with flexibility and clarity. Flexibility without clarity feels like abandonment. Clarity without flexibility feels like command. Flexibility can look like variable hours for a cycle, a swap of on-call duties, a short break in the middle of the week, or a quiet time block where the person isn't in meetings. It can also mean recalibrating scope on purpose. We'll ship the thin version now and the rest next cycle. Clarity is the conversation where we name the pressure and the constraints, and we agree on what will change. I try to ask, what's one thing we can remove from your plate this week that would make this sustainable? And what kind of work gives you energy that we can move you toward for a bit? People burn out faster when they feel trapped. Options are oxygen. Organizationally, I like to make burnout less likely with a few structural choices. First, I enforce a push then cool pattern. After an intense 6-week cycle, we'll plan the next one with a deliberate load. Fewer parallel bets, more repair, more training, more cleanup. Second, I set no meeting blocks for engineer-heavy teams, 2 to 3 afternoons a week, where focus is the default. Third, I normalize taking real time off and I plan coverage, which brings me to another theme, being more than one deep. Bus factor isn't a joke, it's a metric. If only one person knows how a thing works, the organization is fragile. A cadence helps because it creates natural windows to rotate roles and pair people. I like a 2 deep policy where possible. 2 people can perform any critical function, even if one is the primary. This doesn't happen by wishing. It happens through pairing, rotations, and intentional documentation. Pairing, schedule periods where 2 people work the hard parts of code, tests, or procedures together and leave notes as they go. Rotations, change who is the driver for a component each cycle. Have someone shadow on call before they take the pager. Documentation, not a novel, living readmes that let an adult pick up the thread. In flight or test operations, it means 2 people trained for each key position: test conductor, safety pilot, telemetry, ops lead, and a checklist that can actually be used by either. Coverage planning is the practical face of being 2 deep. When someone goes on leave, we don't make do. We fork responsibilities on purpose. Who holds the pencils? Where are the run books? What changes will we avoid while this person is out? In software, we'll set code freeze windows around major absences or bring risk down by killing big merges during those weeks. In hardware, we'll avoid first-time operations without the full crew. The point isn't to treat people as interchangeable. It's to make the system resilient to normal human life. Now, baselines. A baseline is a snapshot of what we believe to be true about scope, schedule, spec, and spend at a point in time, plus the risks we see and the reserves we hold. Baselines matter because they create shared reality. Without them, every meeting is an argument about what we're even doing and what has already changed. I like to set or update the baseline at the end of each 6-week cycle. We freeze the agreed scope for the next cycle, note the changes from the last baseline, and record the risk posture. Then, during the cycle, we treat changes as changes, explicit and justified, not casual drift. What do we do with risks when we're baselining? We treat them as first-class work. Each risk gets 4 things: an owner, a probability and impact estimate, a mitigation plan if it's above threshold, and a trigger that tells us when the risk is turning into an issue. We also decide whether we're going to mitigate, transfer, accept, or avoid. Mitigate means we'll do specific tasks to drive probability or impact down. Those tasks go on the plan like any other tasks. Transfer might mean a vendor warranty or an insurance mechanism. Accept means we're keeping an eye on it without spending cycles yet, usually coupled with a contingency plan. Avoid means we change scope or architecture to eliminate the risk. We'll also decide whether to assign reserves, time, budget, or capacity to cover the risk we know we're likely to consume. It is better to protect a week for integration, rework will appear, than to pretend it won't, and then torch your demo. Risks come in families. Technical, our design might not meet the performance target. Operational, we might not have the test range slot we need. People, key person might be out. Vendor, lead time slip. Regulatory, approval may require more evidence. Safety, a hazard we haven't fully mitigated. Tag them. Keep the list small and active. A risk list with 300 items is the same as having no risk list. It hides the 5 that will hit you. laying baselines to change control and keep that lightweight. If a stakeholder wants to add scope mid-cycle, we run the change through a short impact note. What is the change? What lever are we pulling? Scope, schedule, spec, or spend? What's the impact on the acceptance criteria for this cycle? Which risk does it change, up or down? Who approves? If the change is minor and still lets us hit the end state, we take it. If it's major, we either move it to the next cycle or we consciously trade something out. The goal is not bureaucracy. The goal is to prevent the slow leak that makes demos fake and retros bitter. Let me share an example of how baselining and risk work together. We were 4 weeks into a cycle to deliver a new telemetry ingestion path for flight logs. The baseline said we'd handle 5 core channels within 15 minutes of flight end, with 99% success across 10 flights. At the end of week 4, we discovered a vendor SDK bug that caused sporadic hangs on ingest under network jitter. Big risk, technical, high impact, medium probability, emerging. The team's instinct under pressure was to just keep pushing and hope week 5 hardening would fix it. We paused and wrote a risk note. Owner, probability, impact, mitigation options. A, temporary watchdog and auto restart. B, swap SDK, calls for a lower level client with a retry library we trust. C, reduce scope to 3 channels to hit the success rate. We chose A for week 5, fastest to stabilize, and B as a week 6 action to lock it down. We also updated the baseline to show the risk and the mitigation, so if the success rate nudged to 97%, we wouldn't pretend we hit 99%. That small discipline meant we walked into the demo honest. The system held, and we had a plan to erase the workaround next cycle. We didn't move the goal. We adjusted our path and our risk posture in the open. Let's come back to the 6-week cadence and make it tangible. Here's how a cycle might look on a calendar. Week 1. Kickoff and discovery. We write the 1-page goal brief, context, levers, end state, accountability, runway. We gather the team for a short architecture session to identify the riskiest assumption and design the smallest experiment or build slice that confronts it. We set the measures and acceptance criteria. We agree on the demo format and we populate the initial risk list with owners. Week 2 and 3, build thin and instrument. We code, test, machine parts, wire harnesses, whatever the work is. We instrument early so that we can see behavior, not guess. We do 1 internal checkpoint per week with a short what moved, what's blocked, what help is needed update. If a risk rises, we escalate with a choice. We practice small demos along the way so that the end-to-end story keeps getting real. Week 4, integrate and produce a first end-to-end run. This is where interfaces meet, it's where surprises appear. We schedule a rehearsal demo to see the rough edges. We update the risk list and adjust the plan for week 5. Week 5, hardening. We put the system under soak, we fix the seams, we tune telemetry and alert thresholds. We clean up the things we left rough because we were learning. We freeze new scope except for critical fixes. We prepare rollback procedures even if we don't plan to use them. We write the release notes even if it's an internal deliverable. We remove the sharp corners that a user or a test conductor would trip over. Week 6, demo, retro, baseline, plan. We show the work per the acceptance criteria. We learn together in the retro. We update the baseline, scope, schedule, spec, spend, plus risk posture. And we plan the next cycle with a clear load. What's carrying over? What's new? What are we subtracting? To make room. This rhythm does something subtle. It turns leadership from a series of urgent reactions into a series of intentional decisions. You can still surge when needed, but you're not living in surge. People trust that their week 5 won't be stolen. They trust that if they tell the truth in a retro, it will change next cycle's plan. They trust that baselines are real and that risks will be handled before they become fires. That trust lets them put their heads down in weeks 2, 3, and 4 and actually build. Let's tackle a few practical questions I get about this cadence. What if 6 weeks is too long for my world? Then make it 4. The principle stands: a fixed short cycle with a push phase, a hardening phase, and a reflect phase. I've run 4-week cycles with a 3-week build, half-week harden, half-week reflect. It works, though you need even more discipline about scope. I've also run 8-week cycles for larger hardware integrations, but I still carve out a hardening block and a proper reflect block. The ratio matters more than the absolute number. What if week 5 keeps getting eaten by just one more feature? That's a trust and leadership problem, not a calendar problem. Guard week 5 by policy. If something truly critical arrives, you trade explicitly. We'll take this and we will move that. Document it in the baseline and accept the consequences. If week 5 disappears routinely, your organization is telling itself it values adrenaline over reliability. It will pay for that later in outages and attrition. What if our retros keep turning into status updates or complaint sessions? That usually means you lack the data and the acceptance criteria to ground the conversation, or you lack the muscle to turn insights into actions with owners. Fix both. Bring the scoreboard into the room. Limit improvements to 3. Assign owners and dates. Open the next retro by closing the loop. People will take it seriously when they see it move the system. What about MVP pressure from stakeholders who want more sooner? Educate with examples. Show how thin slices de-risk faster and let you adjust based on evidence. Offer 2 options: a narrower MVP sooner that's reliable and safe, or a broader scope later with higher risk. Tie each to measurable outcomes and risk posture. Most rational stakeholders will choose the thinner, safer path when you present it in the open. If they don't, at least you've documented the trade in the baseline. That matters when reality arrives. How do we plan coverage so vacations and life don't crater the plan? Do it at kickoff. Ask who is out when. Decide which work to avoid scheduling in those windows. Assign deputies for critical roles. Publish the on-call or test roster for the full cycle. Write down who carries the pager, who is backup, and how handoff happens. When people see this done as a matter of course, they stop feeling like their life is an obstacle to the team. One more theme: energy management. A cadence is as much about human energy as work sequencing. In the push weeks, I encourage focus blocks and fewer meetings. In the hardening week, I normalize repairs and celebrate polish. In the reflect week, I try to give people space to think, write, and plan without the constant tap-tap of chat. It doesn't always work, reality intrudes, but when it does, you can feel the difference. The team breathes. I'll close with a story that ties it all together. We were gearing up for a complex system test with an immovable external date. The first pass was a mess. Logs missing, interfaces flapping, rehearsals that felt like improvisational theater. We pivoted into a 6-week cadence. Week 1, we wrote a very blunt one-pager. Here's the problem. Here are the levers. Here's what viable means for this test. Here are the acceptance criteria. 5 clean end-to-end rehearsals with 0 write-ups in the last 2. We named risks and owners. Weeks 2 and 3, we built thin and instrumented. Week 4, we integrated and did the first end-to-end. It broke in predictable and some surprising ways. Week 5, we fixed seams and soaked. Week 6, we demoed the rehearsal, did the retro, and reset the baseline. The next cycle, we repeated the pattern with a tighter scope. By the time the external date arrived, we weren't praying, we were executing. Same people, different rhythm. Cadence is the quiet partner of trust. It promises your team that intensity will have shape, that recovery is built in, that learning will be harvested, that risks will be named and handled, and that viable will mean safe and reliable, not just it worked on the slide. It gives you a place to spot burnout before it breaks someone. It gives you a reason to train a second person for every critical job. It gives you a way to tell the truth about change by updating the baseline in daylight instead of pretending nothing moved. In the next episode, we'll go deep on hiring as product design, scorecards, 90-day outcome plans, and how to assess for capable and coachable. For now, start small. Pick one project. Write the one-pager, protect week 5, hold the retro and change one thing, update the baseline and share it. Watch how the tone shifts when people know the rhythm and trust you to keep it. That's the sound of a team that can go fast for a long time. If this was useful, follow Built to Trust wherever you listen, hit subscribe, and share it with a teammate. Your ratings and reviews help more builders find the show.